You ever have that one neighbor who thinks your life is their personal TV show? Yeah, meet Bob. Bob, the middle-aged, binocular-wielding, self-appointed neighborhood watch commander who had nothing better to do than spy on me from his front window. At first, I thought maybe he was just curious. You know, the kind of guy who peeks out when he hears a weird noise. But no, Bob was committed. Rain or shine, day or night, he was always there, peeking through his blinds, pretending to water his plants while holding a hose that wasn't even turned on. At one point, I even tested it. I waved at him. No reaction. I made direct eye contact. Still nothing. This man was dedicated to his surveillance like he was getting paid for it. So I decided, if Bob wanted a show, I was going to give him a show. It started subtly. Too subtly, in fact. At first, I didn't even realize what was happening. One day, I walked out to grab the mail, and as I bent down to open my mailbox, I felt it, a strange prickle on the back of my neck. You know that eerie feeling when someone's watching you, that sudden awareness that makes you look over your shoulder? Yeah, that. I glanced around, expecting to see a stray cat or maybe a neighbor working in their yard, but no, everything looked normal, a little too normal. Then, something moved. Across the street, from behind a half-opened window, I saw them, a pair of binoculars. A faint glint from the sun reflecting off the lenses gave them away, and behind them, Bob, my quiet, nosy, unemployed by choice neighbor, who seemed to have nothing better to do than monitor my every move like he was the FBI's laziest recruit. At first I thought, maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe he was bird-watching. Maybe he just liked the scenic view of my front yard. So, I decided to test it. I walked back inside, waited 5 minutes. Then, I stepped back out, this time without a purpose. No mail, no trash, just me, standing in my driveway, looking around. I spotted the blinds twitching. My eyes narrowed. I stepped back inside, waited another 5 minutes. Then I walked outside again, this time holding an empty cardboard box like it contained nuclear launch codes. And there it was again, the same twitch, the same glint, the same movement behind the blinds. It wasn't a coincidence. Bob was watching me all the time. I was living in his very own neighborhood soap opera, and apparently I was the main character. But what sealed the deal was when I walked out one day and caught him pretending to water his plants with an empty hose. That's when I knew. This wasn't curiosity. This was a full-blown obsession, and if Bob wanted to make my life his entertainment, oh, I was about to give him a show he'd never forget. At first, I wanted to be reasonable. Maybe Bob wasn't that bad. Maybe he was just lonely, bored, or confused about how privacy works. So, I decided to extend an olive branch. Well, more like a tomato branch. I had a small vegetable garden in my backyard, and that summer, my tomato plants had gone into overdrive. I had more tomatoes than I knew what to do with, so I figured, why not use them to break the ice? Maybe if I played friendly, Bob would chill out and stop treating my house like his personal live-action surveillance project. One morning, I saw him outside, pretending to check his mailbox, despite the fact that the mail hadn't even arrived yet. Classic Bob move. I grabbed a small basket, threw in a handful of fresh tomatoes, and walked over. Me. Hey, Bob, thought you might like some fresh tomatoes. I grew them myself. Bob froze. He looked at the tomatoes like I had just handed him a ticking time bomb. Bob, oh, thanks. He took them, but instead of showing any appreciation or even basic human emotion, he mumbled something and quickly shuffled back inside. Weird, right? But it gets worse. The next morning, I went outside and saw something that made me laugh out loud. Bob had left the tomatoes on his porch, completely untouched, like he was scared they were part of some elaborate scheme. At first, I was confused. Did this man think I poisoned them? Did he think they were part of a psychological operation? Then I remembered. Bob was paranoid. I could only imagine what was going on inside his head. Maybe he thought the tomatoes were some kind of tracking device. Maybe he suspected I had bugged them with tiny microphones. Who knows? At that moment I realized something. There was no reasoning with Bob. No amount of neighborly kindness was going to stop him from treating me like I was the lead suspect in his imaginary crime drama. So, I stopped trying to be nice. If Bob wanted drama, I was going to give him a front row seat to the greatest show he'd ever seen. After the failed tomato peace offering, I figured Bob would either back off or at the very least tone down his hobby of treating my life like a high-stakes spy thriller. I was wrong. In fact, it seemed like Bob had doubled down. The next few days, I noticed him watching me even more frequently. Every time I stepped outside, whether it was to take out the trash, water my plants, or just breathe fresh air, I could feel those binoculars locked onto me. So, I decided to conduct another test. One afternoon, I set up a lawn chair on my porch with a cold drink in hand. I sat back, relaxed, and waited. Sure enough, the blinds twitched. A faint glint of light reflected off the lenses. Bob was on duty, and that's when I flipped the script. I reached down beside my chair, pulled out my own pair of binoculars, and raised them to my eyes. And I stared right back at him. For a moment, nothing happened. Bob must have been caught off guard because I could see him freeze behind his window. But then, instead of backing off like a normal person, he held his ground. That's right. Bob and I were now locked in a full-blown binocular standoff. For 3 straight minutes, we stared at each other, binoculars up, completely silent. It was like a scene from an old Western movie, except instead of revolvers, we were armed with magnified lenses and a lifetime of pettiness. At this point, I was actually enjoying myself. I adjusted my position, made exaggerated sounds, and even nodded like I was taking mental notes on his spying technique. Bob, however, was cracking under the pressure. His movements became twitchy, his grip on the binoculars unsteady. I could almost hear his inner monologue. Why is he staring at me? Am I the one being watched now? Then, suddenly, slam, Bob dropped his binoculars and yanked his blinds shut so fast that I half expected them to rip off the window. Victory. From that day forward, Bob was a little more careful about how often he spied on me, but unfortunately for him, I wasn't even close to being done. At this point, Bob had learned to be a little more discreet with his spying. The days of blatant binocular standoffs were over, but let's be real, he wasn't done watching me. He just got sneakier. The twitching blinds, still happening. The casually standing outside for no reason routine. Oh, that was still in full effect. The problem was, Bob now knew I was onto him, which meant it was time for me to up the ante. One afternoon, I decided to mess with his nosy little brain by giving him exactly what he wanted. Some high-level neighborhood drama. I stepped outside, casually leaned against my car, and pulled out my phone. Now, my phone wasn't actually on, but Bob didn't need to know that. Then, in my best suspicious criminal voice, I started talking, loudly. Me. Yeah, I know he's watching. No, I told you. We have to be careful. A pause. I could feel Bob's entire soul leaving his body as he pressed himself against his window. Me. No, we can't move it yet. Too risky. We have to wait until it gets dark. I risked a glance toward his house. Bob was glued to his window, eyes wide, barely blinking. I turned my back slightly, as if I was trying to keep my conversation private, but failing miserably. Me. No. We are not digging another hole. That's how people get caught. We need to be smart this time. I heard a faint gasp. Oh, this was gold. Then, for the grand finale, I let out an exaggerated sigh and muttered just loud enough for him to hear. Me. All right, fine. Meet me at the usual spot, but bring the tarp this time. Then I hung up, dramatically. The blinds snapped shut so fast I thought Bob had just witnessed a murder. Now, I don't know exactly what he thought I was up to. A black market organ trade, a secret underground fight club, hiding a body. Whatever it was, he was terrified. And that, my friends, was only the beginning of his paranoia. Bob was officially on edge. After my fake phone call, he started acting like I was running a full-blown criminal empire from my house. Every time I walked outside, he was there, peeking through his blinds, lurking behind his bushes, checking his mailbox 3 times a day. It was obvious. He thought he was onto something, and that's when I realized if Bob wanted a conspiracy, I was going to give him one. Thus, Operation Suspicion was born. Phase 1, the mysterious deliveries. I started ordering a ton of random oversized packages from Amazon, big ones, unmarked. Suspicious looking. One by one they arrived at my doorstep, and every single time I made sure to carry them slowly inside while looking over my shoulder like I was smuggling government secrets. Bob was vibrating with excitement. One afternoon, I upped the stakes. A package arrived, and instead of carrying it inside, I examined it outside. I held it up to the light, I shook it, then scribbled some notes on a clipboard before rushing inside like I was hiding state secrets. I could see Bob practically salivating. Phase 2, the soil analysis. A few days later, I took things to the next level. I walked into my front yard with a spoon and a small plastic bag and started digging. Not a big hole, just enough to scoop out some dirt, inspect it, nod seriously, then carefully seal it in a bag. Bob was losing his mind. I could actually see his silhouette, pacing behind his window, probably debating whether to call the FBI, just to sell it even more. I walked to my driveway, pulled out my phone, and said, in a hushed voice, "Me. Yeah, I got the sample. No, it's exactly what we expected. We need to move fast." I didn't even need to check. I knew Bob was writing this down for his imaginary case file. Phase 3, the red folder. That night, I walked outside holding a bright red folder labeled confidential. I sat on my porch, flipping through empty pages, shaking my head like I had just uncovered the truth. By now, Bob had no idea what was real anymore, and that was exactly what I wanted. At this point, Bob was a walking panic attack. My suspicious activities had him on high alert, and I could tell he was dying to know what I was up to. So, naturally, I decided to take things to the next level. If Bob thought I was involved in shady business, I was going to make sure he saw the most suspicious thing yet. It was time for the secret meeting. Phase 1, the mysterious arrival. That evening, right as the sun was setting, my friend Jake arrived, but not in normal clothes, oh no. Jake showed up in a black suit and sunglasses, looking like a mix between an FBI agent and a low-budget James Bond villain. He pulled into my driveway slowly, stepped out of his car with a black briefcase, and nodded at me seriously. Bob, he was watching. I saw the blinds twitch violently the moment Jake stepped onto my porch. Bob's whole house went dark, a classic move for someone who's definitely still watching, but trying to be sneaky about it. Phase 2, the whispered negotiations. Jake and I stood outside, keeping our voices low and serious. Me, are you sure the location is secure? Jake, yeah, but we don't have much time. Then, I took the briefcase from him, popped it open, nodded gravely, then snapped it shut immediately. It was completely empty, but Bob didn't know that. To really sell the act, I pulled out my clipboard. Yes, I had a clipboard at this point. Scribbled something down and muttered, "Me, this changes everything." Bob was probably sweating bullets. Phase 3, the dramatic exit. Jake gave me a firm handshake, one of those serious, businesslike, this is the last time we'll speak kind of handshakes, before quickly getting into his car and driving away without turning on his headlights. I stood in my driveway for a moment, looking deeply concerned, then rushed inside like I had just received classified intelligence. By the time I glanced back at Bob's house, his blinds were shut tight. He was absolutely losing it, and little did he know, the best part was yet to come. Bob was now fully convinced that something illegal, dangerous, or downright otherworldly was happening at my house. So naturally, it was time to push him over the edge. I had already planted the seeds of suspicion, the mysterious deliveries, the whispered conversations, the dramatic briefcase handoff. Bob was deep in conspiracy mode, but now, I needed something big, something that would haunt his dreams. That's when I had an idea. The glowing garage. Phase 1. The setup. I bought a set of cheap red LED lights and set them up in my garage. I arranged them so that they cast an eerie, unnatural glow, making it look like I was running some kind of top-secret experiment. Then, I left the garage door open, just a crack. Not enough for Bob to see what was inside, just enough for the glow to leak out, flickering ominously into the night. Phase 2. The suspicious behavior. At exactly 10 p.m., my friend Mark showed up, wearing a full hazmat suit. Yes, a hazmat suit. I stepped outside, also dressed in protective gloves and goggles, carrying a metal box with tongs. I whispered to Mark, nodding seriously, then handed him the box, like it contained plutonium, stolen from a secret government lab. Bob's porch light flickered on. Oh yeah, he was watching. Phase 3. The final push. To really sell the moment, Mark and I slowly carried the mystery box into the garage, moving like we were handling something that could explode at any second. Then, just before stepping inside, I turned toward Bob's house, pulled out my phone and said loudly, "Me, we have to contain it before it spreads." Slam. Bob's blinds snapped shut so fast I thought his window might shatter. He was done. I had no doubt in my mind. He was either frantically scribbling notes for his paranoia journal or already dialing 911, and sure enough, less than 10 minutes later, I heard the sound of approaching sirens. Bob had finally broken, and I was just getting started. It finally happened. After weeks of paranoia, binocular battles, and staged espionage, Bob had reached his breaking point. I knew it was coming. After all, I had just paraded around my driveway in a hazmat suit, carried a glowing mystery box into my garage, and loudly implied that whatever was inside needed to be contained. So when I heard the distant sound of sirens, I knew exactly what had happened. Bob had finally called 911. Phase 1. The arrival of the cavalry. Not just one police car, not two. 3. 3 patrol cars pulled up in front of my house, lights flashing. By now, several neighbors had come outside to watch the drama unfold. Bob, of course, was standing on his porch, arms crossed, looking smug, like he had just single-handedly taken down a dangerous criminal mastermind. I stood in my driveway, blinking like a confused idiot, as 2 officers approached me. Phase 2. The investigation officer, Romer 1. "Sir, we received a report of suspicious activity." I glanced at Bob's house. Sure enough, his blinds were open, just a crack. He was watching. I put on my best puzzled citizen face. "Me? Suspicious? Oh, you mean my science project?" The officers exchanged glances. Officer number 2. "Science project?" This was where I had to sell it. I led them into my garage, where, of course, there was nothing but glow sticks inside a metal lunchbox. Me? Yeah, I'm studying phosphorescent minerals. You know, seeing how they react under different lighting conditions. The officers looked so incredibly done. One of them sighed deeply, rubbing his forehead like he was regretting every decision that led him to this moment. Officer number 1. "So, no hazardous materials?" Me? "Nope, just some glow sticks and a little bit of harmless fun." Phase 3. Bob's public humiliation. The best part? After checking everything, the officers walked straight over to Bob's house and started lecturing him for wasting police time. Bob tried to argue, but the officers weren't having it, and from the look on his face, I knew one thing for sure. I had won. The flashing red and blue lights painted the whole street in chaos. 3 patrol cars, all for me. Neighbors peeked through their windows. A few even stepped outside, whispering to each other. But the star of the show, oh, it was Bob, standing on his porch, arms crossed, looking like he had just cracked the biggest crime of the century. I stood in my driveway, pretending to look completely confused, as 2 officers stepped out of their squad cars. Phase 1. The investigation. One of the officers approached me with a no-nonsense expression. Officer number 1. "Sir, we received a report of suspicious activity." I blinked. Suspicious? Oh, this was too good. Me? Suspicious? Like what? The officer glanced toward my glowing garage. Oh yeah, the red LEDs were still on. That really wasn't helping my case. Officer number 2, your neighbor claims you were handling unknown materials, wearing protective gear, and that there was mention of containing it before it spreads. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Bob, you absolute legend. You really thought I was cooking up radioactive sludge in my garage? I looked toward his house. The blinds were twitching violently. Bob was watching this like a primetime TV drama. I turned back to the officers, put on my best "oh, I get it now" face, and said, "Me. Oh, you mean my science project?" The officers exchanged glances. Officer number 1, science project, phase 2, the big reveal. I led them into my garage, where, surprise, there was no hazardous material, no crime lab, just a metal lunchbox filled with glow sticks. Me. I'm studying phosphorescent minerals, seeing how different lights affect their glow. The officers looked so incredibly exhausted. One of them let out a deep sigh, rubbing his forehead like this was the dumbest call he had ever responded to. Officer number 2, so, no biohazards? Me. Nope, just glow sticks. Phase 3, Bob's public humiliation. After checking everything, the officers marched straight to Bob's house. I couldn't hear everything, but the tone of their voices, oh, they were not happy. And Bob looked like he wanted to disappear. I stood in my driveway, sipping my drink, basking in my glorious victory. Bob's master plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of exposing me as some kind of underground scientist-criminal hybrid, he had successfully wasted police time, and the officers were not happy about it. As I stood there, arms crossed, thoroughly enjoying myself, I watched as 2 of the cops marched straight to Bob's house. Phase 1, the lecture of a lifetime. At first, Bob looked smug. He stood on his porch like a hero, the brave neighborhood informant who had just saved the community from glow sticks. Then, the officers started talking. I couldn't hear everything, but from the way Bob's expression slowly melted from pride to pure regret, I could fill in the blanks. Officer number 1, do you understand what a false report is? Officer number 2, sir, this is the 3rd time we've been called to your street in the last year for suspicious activity. Officer number 1, glow sticks. You called us over glow sticks. Bob was sputtering, shaking his head, waving his arms wildly, like he was trying to convince them that he had solid evidence of my evil deeds. Meanwhile, I just stood there, sipping my drink, like a villain, watching their plan come to life. Phase 2, the walk of shame. After a few more minutes of what I assume was an intense reality check, the officers finally turned away from Bob's porch. One of them shook his head in pure disappointment as he walked back toward his squad car. The other one, he made sure to send Bob a final warning. Officer number 2, sir, unless you have real evidence of a crime, do not waste emergency resources again. Bob nodded furiously, like a kid caught cheating on a test. He was humiliated. As the officers pulled away, I waved at them, big, exaggerated, neighborly waves. Me. Thanks, officers. I'll be sure to keep my experiments contained. They didn't even respond, just drove off in silence, probably questioning their career choices. Bob, he had vanished inside his house, and I had a feeling that for the first time ever, he wasn't going to be watching me for a while. For the first time in years, I stepped outside without feeling the weight of binoculars drilling into my soul. Bob, he was gone. Well, not gone. I didn't get that lucky, but his obsession with my life, over. Phase 1, the great disappearance. The morning after his 911 humiliation, I did my usual test. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and took my time looking around. No twitching blinds, no sudden mailbox checking, no fake gardening sessions. Bob was MIA. To be sure, I pulled one last reverse Uno card. I grabbed my own binoculars and aimed them at his house. Nothing. His curtains were shut tight. His porch light was off. The man had retreated into the shadows like a villain, defeated in the final act of a movie. It was glorious. Phase 2. The unthinkable happens. A few days later, I noticed something shocking. Bob had put up curtains. Yes. The man, who had treated his windows like a private screening of my life, had suddenly decided that privacy was important. Oh, the irony. Even better, I overheard one of my other neighbors talking about him at the mailbox. Neighbor: "Yeah, Bob's been real quiet lately. Guess he finally learned to mind his own business." I had to bite back a smug grin. Phase 3. Victory is sweet. With Bob officially neutralized, life returned to normal. No more feeling like I was living in a low-budget spy thriller. No more binocular battles. No more fake phone calls about bodies that needed moving. But best of all, I knew that every time Bob saw me, he'd remember what happened. He'd remember the humiliation, the police visit, the absolute destruction of his neighborhood detective dreams. And that was better than any revenge I could have planned. Mission accomplished. I went back inside, sat on my couch, and turned on the TV. Finally able to enjoy my own drama-free life. And Bob, well, if he was still watching, at least now, he was doing it from behind closed curtains.